So I recently came back to Elden Ring to play Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and I wanted to talk about it. I've got a lot to say about it. Elden Ring was the first Souls-like I played, so that will probably give away a lot of what I'm going to talk about. I recently did a video on Minecraft, and to put this into perspective, I had a 2-page script when I was going to talk about Minecraft, and the video ended up being 3 hours long. I've written a lot of notes for Elden Ring, and it is 5 pages long. And I'm going to be honest, if I go through all the things that I want to talk about, I'm not going to edit that video. It's going to be way too long. What I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about the things I don't like about the game. There's a lot of positives. I think the game is great overall. But from what I can tell, pretty much all of the positives have already been discussed. I don't think I've got anything new to say in regards to the positives, but I do feel like I've got a lot of new things to say in regards to negatives. This was my first Souls-like, and it was rough. I actually really hated Elden Ring. In particular, when I got to the end of the game and it's like Fire Giant, Godskin Duo, Malekith, and then Elden Beast, like in a row, and then Faramazula, which I found really difficult. That ruined the whole game pretty much. That really soured my experience with the game. Most of the rest of the game was great. Exploring was amazing. The art is incredible. The enemy design is really good. But the gameplay in particular, I really don't click with. I really don't like it. Elden Ring is so different to basically any other game I've ever played. And there is so much in this game that just did not click with me. And still now, I've come back for Shadow of the Erdtree. For a bit of context, I played Elden Ring for 118 hours. I'm currently on something like 168 hours now, so I've been playing Shadow of the Erdtree for 50 hours. And Shadow of the Erdtree is great. This is so much better. I played Elden Ring back in 2022. Shadow of the Erdtree I've been picking up this year in 2026, and this is just, it feels completely different. And I've gone back to Elden Ring and I've played Elden Ring content. I went for a dungeon in Elden Ring. I can show you on the map. I went here, which I hadn't discovered before, and it was horrible. It was just a really miserable experience. Pretty much all of the dungeons in Shadow of the Erdtree, meanwhile, are excellent. Even the dungeons are good. One of the dungeons in particular had like a bunch of pots inside, and I went through it. It was really, really tense. It was, I was checking every corner. I cleared the whole dungeon, and it felt like such an immersive experience. I didn't feel that way for a lot of Elden Ring. A lot of Elden Ring was just frustrating. The DLC feels very different, and the boss design, more than anything, feels like a massive difference. Going through this dungeon, the very end of the dungeon was ulcerated tree spirit, or whatever it's called, which was just terrible. Magma worm is another enemy that I really hate. I got stuck on a magma worm really early on in this game. There's a lot of just bad bosses. It's the problem. And even the main bosses feel massively overtuned. But anyway, that's what I want to talk about. The issue, of course, is I have so much to talk about. I'm going to skip all the positives. So to be clear, I've seen people say that the Elden Ring community is a bit toxic and stuff. I don't think that's true. I'm sure Elden Ring players are not like Pokemon players where you're not able to criticize the game. Like, I mean, I'll find out, I guess. But I think with the context that this is my first Souls-like, I think a lot of people will hear what I'm going to say and be like, yeah, that's completely understandable. Like, if I had played through all of the other Souls games first, I think I would have had a lot easier of a time playing this, because so much is not explained to the player. So many things are unintuitive, so many things are ambiguous on purpose. Anyway, yeah, this is going to be a bit of a rant about all of the ways that I found this game really difficult. But yeah, I went in completely unprepared for this game. I've played so many different games over the years. I've been playing games all my life, and Elden Ring was unlike anything else. There is no other game that I've played that comes close to the level of just... We'll get into that. First thing first, multiplayer. What is this here? what is this? A bunch of fingers, a bunch of items that you need to collect. I think it's a horrible multiplayer system. I think it's just horrendous. In any normal game, you just have a menu. In this game, trying to play any kind of multiplayer, I realize that since I've come back, they've improved this a lot. They've added this thing. They've added Colosseums, which are which allow you to play 1v1s with a rule set. That's a great addition. That's really good. But so much else about the game, so much else about the multiplayer is still really complicated. The amount of times when I have had to use multiplayer a few times to get through sections of Shadow of the Erdtree, because I didn't do that in standard Elden Ring, and the game was just a slog. Certain areas in this game I use multiplayer, so in particular this area gave me a lot of trouble. I think I went here too early because this area is locked off, so that has made me realize I probably was meant to come here much later. I was meant to come back to this, but I used multiplayer to get through here. And this was the other area. This area here, I couldn't even figure out where the boss room was. I was just walking upstairs, downstairs. There were so many different routes to take. So I used multiplayer to get me to the boss. When I got to the boss here, I died instantly, but that was great because that meant I got to replay the boss solo, and then I beat Mesmer by myself. Here, however, the multiplayer people that I was playing with, we ran all the way to the boss room. I didn't even realize there'd be a boss, and then we went inside, and the two teammates that had guided me through the level and killed everything, they killed the boss pretty much instantly. So I don't even know if this is a good boss or not. I can't even rate this one. But in Shadow of the Erdtree, so far I've killed Dancing Lion, Relana, Mesmer, and I think that's it. I'm currently at this boss here, and this one I really like. The other bosses I used spirits. This one I kind of want to just go in and keep playing it, and I'm going to try to do it without spirits, because it feels like a well-balanced, well-designed boss that you can actually read the attacks. We'll talk about that in a moment. One big problem with multiplayer is that in order to get it to work, you need to find a effigy of the martyr, I think it's called, which is basically like a little cross. I'll put it on the screen. And great, so when you're running around the world, if you want multiplayer, you are looking for that grey cross shape. The problem is that there is something called a Stake of Marika, and it looks basically the same. Stake of Marika and Effigy of the Martyr, they look pretty much the same. They're a grey cross. I don't know why they made the multiplayer symbol look so similar to a checkpoint, but I mean, everything is difficult in this game, even trying to understand multiplayer. So you know, that's how difficult Elden Ring is. Quest design is crazy in this game. A really good example was when I came back to the game. I just kind of used a bunch of random stuff. I'll talk about that later for Elden Ring. In Shadow of the Erdtree, I was really, really underpowered. I've had to do so many different things to get myself powerful. I've had to get different items. And I got this item here, Shard of Alexander. And I could not figure out where it was. Somebody online had told me, people on the internet had told me where to go. I had to go to here, Farum Azula, somewhere here, this one I think. I had to travel all the way to Farum Azula to find Alexander. The issue was that he was not here. And I looked all around the map. I was looking for a symbol of Alexander. In the end, it turned out that he was here. I'd killed a boss here somewhere, another magma worm. I think I've killed 4 magma worms. Alexander was here. There was no symbol for him, and if I had not looked that up, I would never. He was just standing in lava. It doesn't even make any sense. He was literally just standing in the lava in a corner, away from everything. I don't see how anyone would discover that without using a guide, and most of the quest content in this game is exactly like that. It expects you to go to places you would never go to. Rani's quest was a good example. I did complete Rani's quest. I would never have completed that without a guide. Even worse, very, very important content is completely missable. So I got quite far through Elden Ring. Um, I'll talk about Morgoth later. I got all the way into Godric's castle and stuff, and then I decided to watch some YouTube videos to see if I was doing something wrong, and I saw in the videos that people were summoning spirits, and I didn't know what that was. I didn't even know that was a thing in the game. There's a symbol that sometimes appears on the screen that's like a gravestone. That means you can summon a spirit, but I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. And what the issue was, Rani is a character that appears somewhere. I don't even know where it was. It was in some place in the very first area, and I had gone to that area and I'd completely walked past her. I'd missed her. I didn't even realize she was there. Um, and you're supposed to talk to her, and she gives you a magic bell, and then you're supposed to use the spirits, which I'd been collecting the whole time, but I didn't know how to use. You use the bell to use the spirits. So, although a lot of players I've seen online have talked about how Elden Ring is the easiest Souls-like game, it's a game that's really good for new players. It's a game that really helps you, and it's an easier game. It's not easy because it doesn't explain anything. If the game had given me the spirits really early on, it would have made a lot of the earlier part of the game much easier and much less stressful. But I didn't even know the spirits existed. I didn't know where to find them. So that is a constant throughout the entire game. Um, another thing to point out is that at the moment you can see I'm holding the weapon with two hands. I didn't know this was a thing. Um, so I remember equipping an Asher War to a weapon for the first time, and then I started doing this, trying to use the Asher War. Okay, that didn't work. That doesn't do anything. That didn't do anything. That didn't do anything. How do I use the Asher War? Is it down here somewhere? Um, I was pressing every button to try to get the Asher War to work. Turns out that you need to hold the interact button and then like right bumper, and then it makes you hold the weapon in two hands, and then you can use the Asher War. It's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. That I don't remember ever being told anywhere in this game that you can do this. And more importantly, I was basically running through the whole beginning of the game like this. I was just having a torch and a weapon. Most of the time I didn't need the torch when I was in a fight. And if you put the weapon away and you two-hand a weapon, you deal 1.5 times the damage, if I'm correct. I think that's how much damage you do. That's a big increase. That would have helped me a lot when I was just playing this game and using one weapon anyway. Um, so yeah, more things that just it doesn't make any sense. Um, too many things in this game I've had to Google to find out. I've had to look them up because the game doesn't explain anything and it's very unintuitive, very ambiguous. Um, Other things, how are players supposed to understand something like rune arcs, for example? These things here. So what that has done is I don't even know where it is, to be honest. This, um, you can collect these runes as you play the game. It looks like if you just select one, you get this. You get a raise in maximum HP. Turns out that you need to use. It turns out you need to use the thing that I just did, and that gives you the Great Rune power. But when you die, you lose it, and you need to use another rune shard or whatever it's called. How would anyone know that? How would anybody know? You know, oh, I've killed a boss. That's going to make me stronger. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do anything. And this makes me wonder how many mechanics in the game do players never engage with because they don't even know they exist. When I watched up a tutorial on how to use the Great Runes, I saw probably hundreds of comments all saying they didn't know this. Some of the comments were saying, I played this game for hundreds of hours and I never knew this was a thing in the game. That is ludicrous. Like players don't understand. Um, most people um, every time I look up a guide, I'm not the only one there. There's often thousands of people who have watched the same videos trying to understand something because it isn't intuitive. Um, Another thing quick, there's no way to replay bosses. Not really a gameplay complaint, but it's very, very crazy to me that like when the player base talks about this game, they talk about how the bosses are what you're here for, pretty much. You know, the fighting these huge enemies. This is like the main appeal. This is what uh, people are always talking about and putting on the internet. Every time you fight a boss, you kill it, and then you have to play through the entire game again. This was really frustrating because in standard Elden Ring, most of the bosses I really hated, but there was one that I really, really enjoyed. It was Godfrey. Godfrey I really liked. Um, I think he's called Godfrey. Horaloo, Godfrey. Maybe that's the same person. I don't know. This this was a boss that it was the only boss I think in the game where every time he would kill me, I was like sitting here with a smile on my face. I was like, yeah, I deserve that. Like I saw it coming. It was well telegraphed. I got punished and it looked cool. And I've died to it once, but I'm never going to die to it again. The next time this boss does that, I'm going to avoid that attack, and I did. And it felt really, really good. It was really enjoyable. Easily the best fight in the whole game. I am not going to play through the whole of Elden Ring again just to fight that guy one more time. And then I have to play through the whole game again to fight him one more time. I think it's absolutely terrible design. There's no way to replay the bosses. What's even more baffling is that other games by this developer do have ways to replay the bosses. They do have boss rushes. They do have different ways to do that. All right, so those are the kind of general things that I think most people are probably going to agree with. All right, so now I'm going to talk about enemy design. This is maybe a bit more controversial, but I think so many of the enemies, especially in Elden Ring, the base game, the DLC enemies are so much better. Too many enemies in the base game they are designed in a way that they feel completely unfair. To try to explain what I mean, in a lot of games that you play, the boss is the boss that you're fighting is trying to test a specific skill. For example, in Metroid Fusion, there's a boss that is extremely fast and you can barely avoid its attacks, but it doesn't deal much damage. So it feels like a very stressful fight, but in reality, it's been balanced in a way that you can handle that fight. You can deal with the speed, and there are very clear openings. Um, Another example could be a boss that hits really hard, but its attacks are very clear and predictable. So if you do get hit, that's your fault. You deserved it. Um, Elden Ring doesn't really do this a lot of the time. Elden Ring makes every boss have everything. Um, in Elden Ring, every boss has everything. Bosses have extremely fast attacks that hit hard. They have slow attacks that also hit hard. They have attacks that are unpredictable. They have attacks that bait you out. Very often I get stuck in a loop where I use the healing flask. While I'm still stuck in the animation, I get hit again. So then I use another healing flask. Then I get hit by another boss animation and I can't do anything. This happens over and over, and it creates a situation where basically once you get hit once, you cannot recover from that. You have to just start the fight over because you're just going to keep getting hit. Another example of this is that bosses are not designed to deal with a certain strategy. For example, many bosses can fight up close and they can fight at range. They have very large sweeping attacks. They can cross distance towards you very quickly. They have everything, exactly what I said. Bosses have everything. It feels very overwhelming. And so what you end up with a game where the bosses are not testing a specific skill. There's not one particular thing you can do. They are basically testing every skill at the same time, every single time. A good example of this is, for example, fighting Moog. In order to play the DLC, I had to kill a boss called Moog. And I googled how to kill Moog to find a tutorial, to find an easy strategy that wins. The strategy turned out to be go around the open world and find a bunch of items that can weaken him. And there's no way to know that those items are going to work. There's nothing in the game. I don't think there was any quest in the game to tell the player to go to these places to make it easier to fight Moog. It feels like pure luck that players are going to find these things to deal with the boss. I didn't end up using any of those, by the way. I ended up just using my spirit and brute forcing the fight over and over. It was the first thing I had to do after coming back to Elden Ring 4 years later. So yeah, Moog was pretty tough. I didn't even know what the controls were. I'd completely forgotten how to play the game. In fairness, a very quick positive. Um, Most Elden Ring fights are somewhat fair. What I mean by this is every enemy has a specific amount of attacks and they cannot deviate from those attacks. This makes them predictable. For example, if you go into a dungeon in Elden Ring, you might fight a gargoyle that jumps out and attacks you, and if you get attacked by that enemy once, the dungeon is probably going to be filled with a load more gargoyles who are going to attack in the same way. They're going to use the same attack pattern. Um, this is good game design. It creates a situation where the players are not just cheating. Where it creates a situation where the enemies are not literally cheating based on what the developer has programmed in. Another good example is that if an enemy jumps behind you, like it falls down from an area above you and then attacks you from behind, the enemy has to physically be there in the world in order to do that. What I'm trying to explain here is, for example, in Half-Life 2, there's a section where you go into a house, and when you interact with a certain item, the game spawns a bunch of enemies outside the house.
Because when you go up the stairs and you approach the chimney, 4 combined soldiers will come for you. This is where I'm going to use my secondary fire of the pulse rifle for the shotgun guy that will come up. As you see, it vaporized him.
This works great in Half-Life 2 because it creates a situation where usually you are on the offensive trying to push enemy positions and attack the enemy. And then in this particular instance, you are now playing defensive. You have already explored the house, you know the layout, and so you are having to defend yourself against enemies that have just immediately spawned in and have started attacking you. But if Elden Ring did this, where enemies that didn't exist suddenly started existing in the world, that would feel really, really unfair. And the developers obviously realize this, because in Elden Ring, if an enemy jumps you, it is actually hiding behind a corner. Like, it is physically behind the corner, and because it's a third-person game, you can check your corners and find out, if you play carefully enough, you can usually spot where the enemies are hiding. So that's good game design. With that said, though, with all that positive said, the game hides way too many enemies behind walls to the point where it gets just so exhausting to have to check every corner, and 9 times out of 10 there is something there. Shadow of the Erdtree is way worse for this. There are so many more enemies hiding behind walls in this game that it stops being fun. It just becomes a chore. It just becomes frustrating. An enemy taking you by surprise, it's funny if it happens once or twice. When it is happening, like in every area you go to, the gimmick wears off. And a lot of things about this game are like that, where the game is doing the same thing over and over to the point where it's just not fun anymore. Another issue that I think I have is that when I look up guides on how to get through a particular area, if I've been struggling for a really long time and I cannot progress, what's really disappointing is that I often feel like I'm just playing the game wrong. When I play this game, I am trying to kill every enemy in order and survive the entire sequence to get to the next site of grace. When I look up a guide, 9 times out of 10, players are just running past everything. And it's disappointing that that is the actual optimal way to play the game. It is not beneficial to you to actually engage with the combat, even though the game seems to want you to engage with the combat. The real optimal way to play the game is to just run past everything and to not engage with anything, which, it seems a bit counterintuitive, but it does work. The game is programmed in a way where the enemies just let you run past them. Okay, I want to talk now about what it is about the combat I really, really hate. I'm going to talk about the defensive options that the game gives you. This is going to be difficult to explain. Obviously, the defensive options in this game seem to work. I mean, people love this game. People defend the way it plays. I don't like the way that it plays. I feel like it's very clunky. I'm very surprised people love the gameplay in this game so much, but I'll get into that in a moment. So most games are focused on making an enjoyable experience for the player by focusing on how the player interacts with the world. For example, movement skills or how the player interacts with enemies. A lot of games have that as their focus. Elden Ring instead feels like it's designed around the player's defensive options. The majority of most of the fights in this game involve the player avoiding attacks and waiting to play the game. You're waiting for an opening, and if you play aggressively, you get punished. So this creates a very strange situation where the player doesn't feel like they're in control. The player doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like you're playing the game. It feels like the game is playing you. Um, this game feels much more like something like Guitar Hero, where the notes are appearing on the screen and you're hitting the buttons as they appear, as opposed to an action game like Batman Arkham Asylum or something, where you are stringing a bunch of attacks together um, to interact with the enemies, which is great. I don't like beat 'em up games in general. I find them pretty boring. This game is a lot more engaging than those kind of games, but it is but it creates a situation where I feel like I'm so passive so much of the time. I feel like I'm barely even playing the game, that I'm just waiting for the game to say, okay, finally it's your turn. And the comparison I just gave to Guitar Hero doesn't work, because in Guitar Hero, everything has maximum visual clarity. If you see a note on the screen, you have to press the button when the note goes to the certain part of the screen. You do not see fake notes. In Elden Ring, meanwhile, you end up in a situation where the game tells you the boss is about to swing its arm at you, dive out of the way. And so you do what the game tells you to do, and then you get punished for it. It basically creates a situation where you have to play the bosses multiple times. Like, the bosses are basically guaranteed to kill you, because there's no way to figure out what to do the first time you play the game. Okay, let's go through all the mechanics. So the first big issue is that there's no animation cancelling, and there's a lot of end lag on so many moves. What I mean by this is, for example, if you look at Counter-Strike, this is a game that I'm familiar with, and it functions the way that I would expect. If I reload my gun in this game, you can see that I have 4 bullets. I press the reload button, and then I now have a full chamber after the animation ends. That's how you expect it to work. But the player can visually see on the screen, once the character has loaded the new magazine of bullets into the gun, then the gun should theoretically have those new bullets in straight away. So if I reload my gun again, and this time I swap to a different weapon partway through, and then I swap it back to my main weapon, the animation did not complete. I did not watch the end of the animation, but the gun has all 5 bullets reloaded back into it. This creates situations where the player has options, something that Elden Ring doesn't do. In most normal games, you have options. So if I reload the gun in Counter-Strike, and then an enemy jumps me, I can quickly swap to my sidearm, and then I can fight back. Then when I swap back to my primary weapon, I have a full clip of bullets if I have done that correctly, if I've timed it correctly. Another good example is in Mario. When Mario in Mario 64 does a triple jump, there's an animation at the end of the triple jump. This happens every time you do a triple jump, because that's the way the game is programmed. But here's me doing a triple jump, and then the animation doesn't play, because you can animation cancel. You don't get locked into having to sit and watch your character do something, because then the player might get punished even though they are pressing buttons and trying to react to something that's happening on screen. So here's Elden Ring. I was spamming the B button the entire time through that, and it would not let me roll. The reason this is so frustrating is that, in my mind, when I'm playing this game, as soon as my character drinks the health potion and my health goes up, that's it. That's the end of the animation. I should now be able to play the game again. So often I will hear the sound effect of my health regenerating, and then a boss is about to hit me, and I'm pressing roll, and my character does not roll out of the way. Because there is so much end lag to the animation. This seems so unnecessary. I don't understand why the player is being punished when the player is pressing buttons to react to what is happening, but the game is denying them and saying, nope, you press the health potion button, you're locked into that. Tough luck. I don't know why it's designed like that. I think it would be way better if, let's say that you go to drink the health potion, and then if an enemy is going to attack you, you can roll out of the way. Maybe you lose your health potion if you haven't drunk it, but at least you managed to dive out of the way. You should. I feel like you should be able to play the game and not be locked into animations, because it doesn't feel realistic at all. Often when I'm playing this game and I'm really immersed in the combat, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I am my character. If I'm drinking the potion and someone's about to hit me with a giant sword, I'm going to dodge that and I'm going to forget about the health potion because I'm going to die if I get hit. But the character does not respond to the way that I want to respond. The character is not me. It feels like I'm giving them commands and they're deciding themselves what they want to do. No, you told me to drink the health potion, so I'm stubbornly going to do that. And then they get hit, and I'm like, well, what did you expect? I told you to dodge, and the character doesn't dodge. I'm just going to include this in the edit, but I'm trying to show you here on the timeline. This is when the animation begins. I press the heal here. Then the animation begins. There, the health potion has been activated, so my character has healed here. But the animation continues, and it's only about here when the roll comes out. Sorry, my software's lagging a lot, but if I can play it, you should be able to see where those markers are at the very end. This whole section here is completely unnecessary. It should allow you to just go from there, it's straight into a roll, but it's impossible to do that. I find this really, really unintuitive. Every single time I heal in this game, my mind is thinking, yes, I have time to avoid the attack. I'm pressing roll. My character's finished healing. In real life, you would just drop the cup on the ground. It's an empty flask. Like, there's no reason to just stand there holding the damn thing when someone is swinging a giant axe at your head. But in the video game, you just take the hit because your character has no sense of urgency. Your character does not care about taking damage, about getting hurt, and it doesn't make any sense. Another issue is that there's a lot of input delay. Input delay is when a player presses something and then the game is not ready for the player to be able to do that, but the game remembers that the player has pressed the button, and so the attack comes out afterwards. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has a lot of input delay. I'm quite familiar with that. Elden Ring has even more. The input delay in Elden Ring is so bad that very often when I'm panicking and I'm trying to roll and the game is refusing to let me roll, when the roll eventually comes out, it comes out twice. And then I just burn through more stamina and I'm getting punished because I'm trying to play the game and the game is refusing to do what I tell it to do. Let me see if I can get it to work. Yeah, there we go, that was it. So that time I was spamming the B button to roll, and then once the roll finally came out after the health potion, I had accidentally spammed it a few more times in the first few frames of the first roll. So when the first roll ended, a second roll came out. This happens frequently, and I know what the answer is going to be. Get good. Don't spam buttons. Stop panicking when you're in a fight. I can't wrap my head around that. I just can't. Um, and in a game that you get punished this severely, it is very, very hard to get into the mindset of just don't panic. One more thing to add quickly from editing. Um, there is another issue with this game that I forgot to mention. There is an input delay. So when you roll in Elden Ring, you press the B button to roll, but it's only when you lift your finger off the B button that you do the roll. I've done some Googling. Apparently, it's because the B button is tied to both sprinting and rolling. And the developers thought, well, if the player is going to sprint, they will hold the button down. If they're going to roll, they will pull their finger off the button. This is very noticeable in the game. Apologies, I've already shut the game down, so I'm not going to show you, but you can test this yourself. Press B and then wait just a few frames and then pull your finger off the B button to sprint to do a roll, and then your character will roll afterwards. There's like that kind of input delay that I was talking about earlier, that kind of animation lag or whatever it's called. And this is really, really frustrating. This creates situations where the boss will attack me, and then just when the attack is about to hit, I have pressed the B button to do a roll, but the game does not recognize this until my thumb has raised off the button. This creates a situation where I am interacting with the game and pressing the correct buttons at the correct time. I am timing the attacks correctly, but the game is not responding correctly. The game is not allowing me to use the only good defensive option when I'm trying to use it. And so I am getting hit by enemy attacks, even though I'm pressing the button to dodge, because my character doesn't dodge. This becomes extremely infuriating. It's one of the most frustrating things in the game when you're looking at your game and saying, "But I pressed the button," and the game says, "No, I didn't register that." Another good example of this, I was watching tutorials recently, and somebody said you should stop rolling for attacks, you should start jumping for attacks. I could not wrap my head around this. This sounded like the worst advice ever. And then in the video, he explained that when you jump, the lower body on your character from the waist down is completely intangible. You are basically invincible from the waist down every time you jump.
The way it works is that as soon as you click the jump button, your entire lower body will become invulnerable for about 25 frames before you reach the ground, which is way longer than the dodge roll's 13 iframes, making attacks that can be dodged with jumps much more forgiving.
When you jump, your lower body becomes immune to damage. That includes the legs and even part of the stomach, but not the hands hanging off to the side. The immunity starts pretty much immediately, even when you're still visually on the ground, and lasts 60 frames, which is a whole second, compared to 26 frames on a roll. It starts faster, it lasts longer, which means you can dodge some attacks way too early or extremely late and still get away with it.
This is nonsense. It is not intuitive at all. If I hadn't watched the guide, I wouldn't have known that, because on your screen, when you jump, very frequently it looks like your legs are going to be hit by an attack, but in reality you avoid the attack. If I play on the screen now the video that I watched, many of the attacks that this player says that you can avoid, it doesn't look like the player character actually avoids them. It looks like they are getting hit, but the attack is just missing them. And it's basically impossible to tell. So again, as a defensive option, jumping is really bad. Another thing, blocking. You can press the left bumper, at least when I'm two-handing this weapon I can, and if you're using a shield as well, and you can block attacks. This means that I think you use stamina instead of losing health, and you do not get knocked over. So blocking is a great way to play the game, and I never do it, ever. I never block, because it's basically impossible to know what attacks can be blocked and what attacks can't. I don't know why they don't just make it so that you can block everything. I understand a lot of people are going to say, well, obviously you can't block an earthquake. If an enemy breathes fire on you, you shouldn't be able to block fire. Honestly, so much about the gameplay makes no sense already. I don't see why not. I think it would be a lot better for players if blocking was a real option, because very often an enemy will charge up an attack and you don't know what kind of attack they're going to hit you with. You don't know if it's going to be a melee attack that you can block or something that is unblockable. Back jump is completely pointless. This here, I've never ever used this. The only time that I've ever used this is when sometimes I'm standing really near a cliff and I want to start running, and then instead of running, my character jumps backwards and falls off the cliff and I die. The back jump has only ever got me killed. It has never benefited me in combat. I'm sure there are some players who can demonstrate, attacks that you can back away from, But because basically every boss in the game I've only fought against once, you never know the range of the enemy attacks. And because the back jump does not make you invincible, I don't know why. I think this should make you invincible. I think it should make you, intangible, just like the roll does. But no, it doesn't. It just makes you move backwards and then you take damage and you die. This creates a situation where when I'm playing the game, the only defensive option that I ever use is the roll. And the rolling is completely illogical and unintuitive, like most things in the game. When I was playing the game, I'd be fighting an enemy, and then when they tried to attack me, I would do this. Then I would move in and attack the enemy, and then I would do this. Turns out, this is the wrong way to play, because I'm trying to avoid an attack, but I didn't realize that rolling makes you literally invincible, like you cannot be hurt. And it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand how players are supposed to realize this without being taught. Maybe there was a tutorial early on, although I want to be clear. When I played the game the first time, you come out of a cave somewhere, I don't know where it was, and there is a hole in the ground, and you are supposed to jump down the hole to play the tutorial. And I looked at the hole and I went, well, I've heard what these games are like. I've heard that these games try to trick you. I've heard these games are punishing. Obviously, if I jump down the hole, I'm going to die. So I didn't jump down the hole and I didn't do the tutorial until a lot later into the game when I was watching a guide on YouTube who said, by the way, you're supposed to jump down the hole to view the tutorial. Like, everything in this game is ambiguous. Nothing makes sense. They never just tell you what to do. And that was the issue that I was having. I was rolling to avoid enemy attacks by walking backwards. Turns out the optimal way to play the game, the only way to play the game, to be totally honest, is to roll towards enemies, because very often, Morgott is a very good example of this, or Margit, or whatever he's called. He appeared like 3 times in my game. The only way that I found to deal with the boss was to, when he attacks me, roll towards him, and then when his attacks are finally over, I'm close enough that I have an opening and I can do damage. If I was rolling to the sides, often I would then attack. I was using a different weapon back then. I was using a more close range weapon. I would attack the enemy and miss because the enemy was too far away. So you have to learn that this makes you invincible and you have to roll towards them. If that's going to be the game mechanic, I don't understand why the game doesn't make it visually look like you are rolling invincibly. In fact, there is an Asher Ward in the game called Bloodhound Step, and it has an animation where you basically turn into like a ghost when you press the dash. Why is this not the default dash? Because it visually tells the player, look, you are disappearing when you dash, and that makes the player think, oh, maybe I won't take damage when I do a dash. As it currently stands, you do a roll through a sword swing, and I'm looking at the screen thinking my guy should have been cut in half by that, but you're not. You're supposed to play the game like that. And then the very last thing to talk about, the horse. The horse is great. I really enjoy exploring the world with the horse. I think the gameplay is pretty good, but the issue is that the horse has basically no defensive options at all. Like, there's no roll mechanic on the horse. The only defensive options that I've seen, somebody in a guide said, if you're going to be attacked while on horse, get off the horse because you are invincible when you're doing that. That's stupid. Once again, it doesn't look like that, does it? It looks like you should take damage, but you don't. And players have, once again, they're not looking at what's happening on the screen. Instead, people are having to learn the hitboxes behind the scenes, and they're having to kind of visualize what's happening that you can't see in order to play the game. It is not a visually clear game. And this creates problems where enemies that it feels like I'm supposed to fight on horseback, for example, the fire giant and the ruin golem, or whatever it's called, fire golem, I think it's called, the big enemies that feel like I'm supposed to run around them on a horse. Often they have attacks that feel unavoidable. The fire giant has an attack where he puts his shield into the ground and then throws an avalanche at you. I don't know how I'm meant to avoid that on a horse. The same thing goes for the ruin golem. There's a few attacks that I've been hit by that I just looked at and thought, what was I meant to do? How was I meant to get past that other than simply predicting what is going to happen and running to the side to avoid it. You can't get through the attack. Even though the game teaches you when you're playing as a regular character, yeah, you are supposed to run through attacks, but not when you're on a horse. So, alright, that's basically all of the critiques of the gameplay that I had to go through. I'm looking at my notes again. I skipped all of the positives about the game. I don't want to edit this video, so I want to upload this pretty quick. But I do want to talk about the positives of ambiguous design. This game has a lot of ambiguous design, and although overall I think the ambiguous design is pretty bad, there's a lot of positives that do come with it, and I think it has led to the game being so successful. So the first thing to go through, pretty obvious, we live in the information age right now. And if a secret is put into a game, people are always going to know about it today. They're just going to find it on the internet. You know, you're going to be scrolling on whatever kids use, TikTok or something. You're going to see it on YouTube, or people are, you are going to be exposed to the secrets in a game. Developers can't really hide things from players. This is kind of the reason why I feel like so much in Elden Ring is so difficult to understand, mostly in terms of discovering the world. This basically means that the developers can hide a lot of things in the games that feel basically impossible to find unless you just find them by accident or you use a guide. A lot of the items hidden in this game are like that, where I don't know how I would ever find the items that are hidden, in high up places, behind invisible walls. If it wasn't for guides, I would never find them. And a really good example is I took a route in Shadow of the Erdtree that I wouldn't have found without a guide. I had to go through these ruins. They went underground. I think they went to here, Bonnie Village. Then this went all the way along, and then this went up here. There's a church that you can get to, and you can go up here. And I got to this area because of that. I still haven't figured out how to get here. I don't know how to get here. There's a lot of areas. There's also an area here that's all smoky. I don't know how to get there. Yeah, there's so much that I haven't yet discovered, and a lot of it I would only find, like a really good example, I did this area because I didn't know where else to go, and it turns out that you can travel along here, and then this leads, I don't even remember where I went. It was I somehow went up here, and then somehow I was underneath here, and I went down here underneath the land, and then I came out here. That's how I got to this area, which is crazy. Like, I mean, this might be one of, if not the best designed map in any game I've played. It's so, when you do discover these things for yourself, it's really, really fun. It feels like it's mind-blowing. Like, so, I mean, this environment that I'm in here, the introduction to this area when you walk in, and it's so beautiful. And I remember walking around and looking and going, oh, previously I was looking at places and going, that's just background. But then I started looking and thinking, there's something down there. There's a beach down there. And then I went around this area thinking this underground path would lead to the beach. No, it doesn't. The true area, you're supposed to come here, and this is actually not a wall. This is a pathway, like a big pillar or something, that leads to the beach. And then I came up here, and then I got to here, but I still couldn't get to the above path. I don't know how to get to here. And then I got scared because there was loads of hands. But the map design is absolutely genius. It's layered in a way where, and Elden Ring itself, if I go back to the first map, there's a lot of routes in this map that are really, really good. One of my favorite places was this Volcano Manor, and the way that you get into Volcano Manor, if I remember correctly, you have to go like around in a circle or something, and then you get into the manor. This is a fantastic area. I think it's kind of sad that I never see people playing it. Like, I've watched a lot of video of people doing challenges, randomizer runs, and people just do the base content. They just completely ignore this area, even though I think this is one of the best designed regions in the whole game. Yesterday I did this area as well. I've never seen anybody go here on any YouTube video. Um, so that was cool that I went here completely blind. This Windmill Village is what I really love this area. This is one of my favorite areas. I never ever see people go to a lot of the areas in the game. This is a problem. This is a critique of the open world. You know, it's cool that so many areas are optional, but it does lead to a situation where a lot of players are probably missing out on really good content. One area that I played when I came back to the game recently was, where was it? It was this. I discovered this very recently when I just came back. I had no idea this existed, and I was looking up different magic that I hadn't unlocked yet, and there is a Frenzied Flame village that exists in the main Elden Ring map. I had no idea. I had never seen it in my playthrough. 118 hours, and there was still content that I had not seen, which is incredible. Like that is a really big achievement for any game in general, to have so many things, and there's still plenty of things that I must have missed. But there's still a lot of things as well that I think I think this is the area where the enemies are invisible. If I didn't look it up what to do, I don't think I would have figured it out, because I was just getting killed over and over again. It ended up being a really, really fun area once I understood that I was meant to use an item to see the enemy. And I think the developers understand this. I think the developers know we live in an age where people are just going to Google stuff. So you can't really hide stuff. If anything, you might as well hide things in a far more complicated way than you need to, because people are just going to look it up, and that is how people are going to play games. And so you can be even more ambiguous. A lot of the secrets in these Soul games are pretty much impossible without the internet. But this does lead to a situation where these games feel like they have a proper community. The Elden Ring wiki, which I've been using a lot, every time I scroll down to the comments section, it's full of comments. There's hundreds and hundreds of comments on every single article. You do not see this in other games. In other games, when you go onto the wiki, nobody's really there, because most people, do not need to use it. In this game, people need to use the resources. They need to spread information. That basically creates a demand for content creators. It creates a demand for people to talk about things, to explain things. And it creates a situation where players are trying to learn, and they're trying to teach each other how to play the game. And that does create a sense of community that you do not see in other games. And it's interesting that basically every single aspect of the game is like that. There are hidden paths for exploration. There's hidden damage values. Some of the armor sets in the game say things like, this gives you more physical resistance, but it doesn't tell you what % of physical resistance. So I have to go onto Google and find out what exactly the armor sets do. The ones that you get from the bosses definitely do this, like Radahn's armor set and things. You cannot figure things out just by playing the game. You have to look things up. Enemy weaknesses are another good example. Personally, if I'd have designed the game, I'd have made it so that if a boss kills you like 5 times, the game would then start to give you some advice, say, by the way, this boss is weak to fire. Because like many of the things in the game, some are common sense. A flower can be killed by fire. That makes sense. But there's a lot of other enemy weaknesses that don't make any sense. Most enemies are resistant to holy. It's something that I learned recently. Why is that? I don't really know. They just made it so that holy damage is really bad. And then even the story is hidden. The quests are hidden. The lore is hidden, and that creates a situation where, once again, players are sharing this information. They are, there are players who are particularly playing these games just for the lore, and they are sharing what they've learned with other people, and I think that's really cool. I think I think there's some downsides to it, but it's definitely a very unique way to try to tell a story. I think there's definitely a lot of downsides to doing this, but overall, yeah, it, it feels like the game has been designed with the internet in mind, with the modern age in mind, in a way that a lot of older games couldn't do. Games that I played growing up, it was a lot harder to find a guide to, a very old game back then. A lot less people had the internet. So you had a situation where if the developers did not build their game in a way that was completely clear to the player would never be able to beat the game. Um, and this is something that is very different now, and these Souls-like games feel like they have lent into this. And then the last thing to say about ambiguous design is that this is pretty obvious, but this creates really good marketing. Um, people who would never play a game like this are finding out about it. They're learning about it. They are, seeing everybody else play the game, streamers, YouTubers, whatever. It feels like everybody is playing a Souls-like because everybody is forced to talk about these games in order to understand what to do. And so it does create a situation where there's really good marketing and people are being frequently exposed to these kind of games. One last thing to talk about, I did not like the base game of Elden Ring, as I already explained. And I was like, well, I really like the concept of these Souls-like games. I really like the concept, this game does so much well that I haven't talked about, like the way the map reveals itself, the environments, the art design and stuff, all that stuff. Apologies, I didn't give many positives about Elden Ring. There was so much that I did like though, and I like the concept of the gameplay. I just feel like there's so many problems with it. So I decided to try a few other Souls-like games after I played Elden Ring. I played Dark Souls 1, and that game was ridiculously hard. Once again, I didn't know what to do without using a guide. I got stuck in an area with a bunch of ghosts right at the start of the game. The ghosts kept killing me over and over, and then I googled it and it turned out that I was in the wrong place. I was meant to go to a town that had a load of skeletons, so thank you Dark Souls. This area I found pretty much impossible. I kept dying over and over again. When I eventually got through the area with the skeletons, there's a boss that's like a troll on a bridge, and this guy would kill me. And I lost all my runes. I lost everything. And I was done. I gave up with Dark Souls 1. I could not get past the troll on the bridge. Next up I played Dark Souls 3. I got bored and gave up pretty early. I don't even remember where I was, but I was just like, yeah, it's the same kind of gameplay. All the complaints that I've had about the gameplay in Elden Ring, basically the same in Dark Souls 3. The game looks good, like the same kind of positives as Elden Ring, but it just doesn't click with me. Then I played Sekiro. That was too hard. Really bad at parrying in games, parrying mechanics in general. So I found Sekiro far more difficult than Elden Ring, than the other games. So yeah, I gave up Sekiro as well. And at this point I was starting to think, these Souls-like games, maybe this whole genre is just not really for me. Maybe this is just not my kind of thing. And then I played a game called Remnant 2, and finally, after so long, it started to click, because Remnant 2 is a Souls-like that doesn't have some of the flaws. It does have a lot of flaws, but it addresses many of the flaws that I have in Elden Ring. So the first one I'm going to talk about, Remnant 2 is a shooter. This creates a situation where, unlike in Elden Ring, where you are playing passively the whole time, you are waiting for something to happen and you're playing reactively, you are not playing reactively in Remnant 2. You are playing aggressively, you are playing proactive. You can do things the whole time. If the boss keeps running away from you, you can just keep shooting it. And it feels like you can keep applying pressure to the enemy. This means that you can build, this means that, for example, let's say you have a poison build in Remnant 2, you can apply poison to the boss, and you can keep that poison applied. You can keep applying poison over and over. Even if the boss runs away from you, you can keep hitting the enemy over and over to keep that application up. And so you're basically in a situation where you're not waiting for the game to let you play, you're not always being defensive, It feels like you can be proactive. It feels like you have a level of control over the fights in Remnant 2 that you don't have in Elden Ring. It feels like you lack control in Elden Ring. In Remnant 2, you have a control. The boss designs in Remnant 2, I think, are far more fun and creative. There's a lot of really unique fights. Elden Ring tries to have unique fights, but it will often be this enemy is really annoying to deal with. This enemy moves really fast. You don't know what's happening. This enemy is too big. Fire giant, ulcerated tree spirit. These kind of enemies that are just not fun to fight against, even though they are unique. And so the best fights in Elden Ring end up being an enemy that is decently sized. For example, basically all of the enemies in Shadow of the Erdtree, these are enemies that are bigger than you, but they're not so big and they're not doing things that are just way too complicated and difficult to deal with. Remnant 2, meanwhile, it has far more fun and creative boss fights. There's a really good example of a fight where you are fighting a small parasite, and this parasite will run around the room and it will infect bigger enemies, and then you have to kill the larger enemies to reveal the parasite, and then the gameplay is changing throughout the fight. When you are fighting the larger enemies, you are doing things differently to when you are fighting the smaller parasite. When the parasite is in the arena, sometimes it will run up to you and you're now playing close range combat. Then it will run away from you and you're playing long range combat. And this kind of flow, and there's a lot of openings so that you can do different things. You can apply buffs to yourself, you can heal. There's so many different things happening, there's so many different ways to engage, and it's a really fun fight. Another good example is in Remnant 2. There are huge enemies, just like the really big enemies in Elden Ring, but because it's a shooter, these enemies can be far away from the player and they can fit on the screen, and you're not just staring at some dude's foot the whole time. You can actually see what you're fighting. And this just works way better. These giant enemies do not work in Elden Ring. They work so much better in Remnant 2. Another thing, Remnant 2 has difficulty options. Now, to be clear, Remnant 2 is trying to do something very different to Elden Ring. It's trying to be a game where you run around and you collect items. You are collecting different things. You're trying to keep leveling up, and you are not expected to be able to play the game on the highest difficulty until you've leveled up more. It's a grindy game, basically, which I don't like about it, but I enjoyed the game a lot more, probably because I could put it on normal mode and and just have a regular experience and experience all of the content. And I get it, the difficulty of Elden Ring is intentional. I fully understand that, but I'll be totally honest, I don't really understand what would be lost by putting difficulty options in the game. Like, if they just made it so that players who are bad at the game can just play the game on easy and just experience all the content, because maybe they don't care about the fights and stuff. Why is that something that's so controversial in the Souls community? And I've seen a lot of people try to explain why it's fine for the game to be like this, why it's good that the Souls games do not have any kind of difficulty options or accessibility or anything like that. I don't really understand this. At the same time, these games kind of have accessibility, or Elden Ring does. Elden Ring kind of has accessibility. You can have spirits, you can use magic, you can find ways to cheese the boss. But at the same time, I don't know what is meant to be intentional or what isn't. As an example, when I played through the entirety of Elden Ring, I used a skill called Flame of the Red Veins, and this was basically the only way that I could beat Elden Ring. This is a poise breaking skill. It breaks the poise on enemies extremely fast. It does something like 40 poise damage and it comes out fast. So you can poise break pretty much every boss. When I came back to the game recently, I was using this on Moog and it just wasn't doing anything. It wasn't behaving the way I remembered. Then I googled it and I found out that the developers have nerfed this skill so that it does much less poise damage. I think it does only 30 poise damage. And this made me realize, okay, I thought I was using the difficulty options of the game. The game is hard if you play it in certain ways, but the game gives you tools so that you can play the game and make it easier. But because the developers have nerfed what I was using, it makes me think maybe I beat Elden Ring in an unintentional way. Maybe I played through the whole of Elden Ring in a way that developers did not intend for me to play the game, because they had balanced their game incorrectly. So they have nerfed the skill that I use, and which was the only way I could find to beat the game. And this then creates a really weird situation where, like, well, what is the difficulty of Elden Ring? You know, it's all well and good saying to players, if Elden Ring is too difficult, the developers have put things into the game to make it easier. But have they really? Have the developers put things into the game to make it easy, or have they put things into the game that the players are using to cheese the game, but the developers don't intend for you to be able to cheese the game? They intend for you to genuinely struggle and to play in a more legitimate way. And the things that are in the game that are cheesy, you know, they are getting nerfed because you're not supposed to be playing like that. I don't know. I don't really understand Elden Ring's difficulty. I don't understand what they're trying to do. I don't understand what is intentional, what isn't. Apparently they've even changed things, like the last boss in the game, they've added the ability to ride on a horse, which I was not able to do when I played the game, and the last boss it ended up being really miserable, and it was a horrible fight. Apparently they've changed that, which makes me think, you know, did they do something wrong, or did they realize that it wasn't working correctly? I don't know. But yeah, like, you know, Remnant 2 has difficulty options, and I'll be totally honest, I don't understand why this is so controversial in these other Souls-like games. The reason I don't understand this is, let's say that a player pays for a product, somebody buys the game, is that player entitled to experience the product? You know, if I buy this game and then the game is too hard and I literally cannot play the game, is that acceptable for a game to do that? Maybe, you know, there's an argument to be made in the sense of art. Video games are art, and if the vision of the game is to make something difficult and punishing, then yeah, maybe that is acceptable. Maybe that is something that is okay to have in a game. But at the same time, it feels like, as a product, it is strange that people are buying it, and then there must be many, many people out there who are playing very little of the game and then putting it down. In fairness to Elden Ring, you can probably travel all the way up to here, the Golden Castle, just by running past everything. So in fairness, I don't think the argument of Elden Ring is too difficult and you don't get to experience the content. In this game, you can experience a lot of content just by running past everything. But around about here, and the bosses in the area, that is when I feel like things ramp up in difficulty a lot. And it gets to a point where beyond there, a lot of players are just not going to get any further. Another thing to talk about with difficulty is, like, I don't understand how people can even gauge if this game is difficult, or what parts of the game are difficult. I've seen a lot of people disagree and say, you know, this boss took me days to defeat, and then somebody comes in and says, I beat it first time, easy. But we don't know the experience they're having, because the builds that you can have in this game are so totally different. That could be a completely different experience. For example, one player can fight a boss for, say, 15 hours, and they can complain and say, this boss is impossible, it needs to get nerfed. Then a second player can show up and say, get good, skill issue, I beat the boss first time. The issue, however, is that player 1 is playing a slow, heavy melee build, and player 2 is using magic, and they're using summons and spirits. They are engaging with the same content, but they're experiencing it in two completely different ways. And this ends up in a situation where it feels like talking about difficulty in Elden Ring is not possible. It feels like there is so much debate surrounding the difficulty of Elden Ring, because it's so, you cannot quantify what is difficult, especially when players will just show up and say, then just play a different build. And then that creates a situation where, oh, you know, you now need to go and grind a bunch of items, spend a load of souls to level up a bunch of new weapons that you might not even enjoy playing, in the hopes that the people online are right and these weapons are going to be strong. Yeah, and it feels like, yeah, it's very difficult to understand how to communicate difficulty. Quick edit again. Um, One thing that I forgot to mention is that the the meta in Elden Ring is, it feels a bit unhealthy. When I was fighting the Putress at night, I could not beat this guy and I just gave up. So I summoned another player to help me fight the enemy. And the guy that showed up was just a big, giant, fat guy with a big shield. And I've done some Googling around, and this is the meta. Um, the meta for PvE combat, especially against the final boss, apparently, which I haven't got to yet, is to basically make it so that you can tank every single enemy hit, because instead of trying to avoid hits, you can create a build where you have enough sustain to survive whatever it is the enemy has to throw at you. This feels a bit unhealthy for for a game that is supposed to have such good tight combat. This doesn't seem like a great idea, and it's strange to me that so many people are clearly struggling so much that they feel the need to go onto the internet and copy the same build everyone is using. But this, of course, is an issue with a game when there are this many items that the player can find and use. Players are going to optimize the fun out of the game. And yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I'd be interested to know how Souls players feel. Again, this seems to be one of these cases of, well, the game is as difficult as you make it. You can make the game easier by cheesing the enemies, but that also seems kind of counterintuitive to the way the game is supposed to be played. But then the question becomes, how is the game supposed to be played? And then none of us really know. And I do also wonder, in terms of like magic and things, I've seen a lot of Souls players online say, if you beat the game using spirits and you're using magic, you're not playing the game correctly. You're not playing the, you're not playing the game the way you're supposed to be playing it. I don't really know if that is a general opinion or if it's just a kind of vocal minority, but it does seem a bit ridiculous that it's like a lot of players are saying there should not be difficulty options in this game. And then when people are using the tools they have to try to have fun and play the game and beat it in any way they can, people are yelling at them and saying the game is meant to be even harder. The game is meant to be, you're, by making the game easy, you have cheated. And that seems absurd. But like, again, I don't fully understand the the community surrounding these games. I think it's become too much of an obsession that these games are supposed to be hard. I think it is really become ingrained in the player base that Elden Ring and Dark Souls or whatever, these are hard games first. Everything else comes after. Good design comes after. You know, intuitive design. That is secondary to just making the game as hard as possible. And I think that's a bit of a concern, to be honest. I can't help but feel like if I was a fan of these games, would I be happy with, a continued direction? Because I've seen many players say that the games are getting harder and harder. Is that a good thing? Is it good that the games are becoming more difficult? I suppose if the player base is getting better and better at the games, they want more of a challenge. But at the same time, what kind of a challenge would be a challenge that you can actually respect? For example, there are games out there, rage games, where the entire purpose of the game is to cheat you and do things that were completely impossible to detect, things that you could not expect were going to happen, unreactable, enemy attacks and things, which do happen in Elden Ring. There are things that happen in this game that happen so quick. I do not think the human reaction time, no matter how good your reaction times are, I don't see how you can react to these attacks. And that brings about a question of, is it, do players want the Souls games to just be like one of these ridiculous games where the game cheats you and punishes you at every possible opportunity? Is that really what people want? Do people really find, Kaizo, Mario, or whatever fun? I've never liked that kind of game, and some of the fights in Elden Ring felt like they were more going in that direction, where you go in and you have to die the first time in order to understand what is happening. You cannot just play through and use your skill and your talent at playing the game or whatever. You cannot use your abilities of how good you are at the game to win. You have to use your memory of, I went in, I died, I remember where I died, so I will do something else. Like, that's a very different game to a kind of, I guess the question then is Elden Ring an action game? And I think a lot of people will probably say no. Elden Ring is not really an action game. You're not seeing something happen and then reacting to it, because most of the time you don't seem to be able to. You are it's like a memory game, I guess. It's like a kind of, you play the game, you died to something that was completely unpredictable, and then you try again. And then this time you win because you knew that the stupid bullshit was going to happen, and so you avoid the stupid bullshit. I don't know. That to me doesn't feel like particularly fun game design. Getting punished in an unreactable situation, but people are masochists, I guess. Um, that's pretty much all I think I'm going to talk about. There's still many more pages of things that I could talk about. Um, but I basically just wanted to talk about my experience with the gameplay, the mechanics, how I found things so difficult, so hard to understand. Still, I find that things don't make sense. There are still things now that I think, why is the game designed like that? why why is it that rolling through a sword means you don't get killed? Um, yeah, there's still a lot that doesn't make any sense, but that's just the way it is. If you think I need to get good and this is all a skill issue and you hate me and you're angry, if you don't, if you disagree with what I said and you are really angry at me, please buy my book and give me a 1-star review on Amazon, and dislike the video. That'll show me that I need to get good. Um, Thank you for watching.